Products like the ETFs can have a massive impact on price, certainly long term. The shift for corporates and treasury management and adding Bitcoin as part of that treasury management could, of course, similarly have a very meaningful impact on price for Bitcoin.
GM, good morning. Welcome to The Milk Road Show, the daily crypto show that's dishing out crypto tidbits tastier than your grandma's forbidden cookie jar. I'm your host, Jay Hamilton, and today we've got Dean Skurka, CEO of WonderFi, on the show. WonderFi is one of the largest crypto exchanges in Canada, over 1.5 billion assets under custody, over 1.7 million accounts across their various brands. Dean, welcome to The Milk Road Show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Really excited to have you, man. A fellow Canadian, always very exciting on the show, but also really excited to have you guys on the show because you are really leaders, not just in Canada, but globally when it comes to understanding regulation and compliance, which is an area that obviously a lot of the industry is still catching up on. So excited to get your perspectives on that today. We're going to talk about your new Bitcoin and Ethereum treasury program, which you just launched recently. So you are buying Bitcoin and ETH, and we're going to talk about why you're doing that, which is super awesome. We're going to talk about where you think adoption and innovation are coming from for the rest of this cycle and into 2020, 2025. And then we're going to finish by touching on your recent launch of Wonder Labs, which is building an L2 and a non-custodial wallet. So started with a centralized exchange. Now you're going decentralized. Love to see that. Let's start with the Bitcoin and Ethereum treasury program. So on July 10th, you announced that you guys were going to start to acquire Bitcoin and ETH, and that this would take place over the next 3 months until the end of September. Why did you decide to do this?
That's a great question. Look, we've always held Bitcoin and Ethereum and other digital assets on our balance sheet. And, we thought that this was a really strong time to continue to accumulate Bitcoin and Ethereum on the corporate balance sheet and really send a signal to the rest of the market that, as industry experts and, really on the front line of, what's happening on within the digital asset industry, that we are, have a long-term conviction and we are accumulating digital assets at these prices. You think about taking a step back, and the last 6 to 9 months, there's been a lot of excitement, a lot of positive developments in the industry, really kicking off in Q4 of last year with, the announcement of the Bitcoin ETFs. And then you fast forward to January of this year, the ETFs launch, and, everyone gets blown away by the demand, the inflows that are being seen in the market. And of course, Bitcoin, by extension, goes to 75,000. Despite a recent 25% pullback in Bitcoin, peak to trough, there are still strong inflows into these ETF products. You think about the imminent launch of the ETH ETF and the signal that sends, not only throughout the entire industry, but the broader signal it sends that, BlackRock, Fidelity, these institutions that launch these products, are so happy with the results that they want to continue to invest in the industry and roll out additional products and services to support the industry and the growth within it. You think about traditional financial markets continuing to set all-time highs in the US. You think about the fact that, markets are pricing in approximate 70% chance for rate cuts in the US starting in September. And I think those numbers are even higher now.
Actually, it's up to like 85% chance now.
Yeah, exactly. And so you think about all of these variables, and then you think about, of course, the context of this being a halving year, with the halving passed back in April. And, we think this is a really good opportunity to accumulate. We think that this is, really mid-cycle. And, when you see these opportunities, when markets correct, and you think about some of the recent FUD around, Germany and their selling and some of the Mt. Gox distributions, there's a bit of a disconnect between, at least in our opinion, price and, the long-term outlook for the industry. And so, we're encouraged, by the program that we've implemented, and, we're excited to accumulate at these levels. And we hope that sends a positive signal, to other corporates that are considering adding Bitcoin and Ethereum to their treasuries. And of course, to our users across the BitBuy and CoinSquare platforms, that, we have a long-term view on this industry. We always have. And, we're excited by, where prices are today and the way the market has been evolving, over the last 6-9 months. And we expect to continue to evolve over the next year plus.
You nailed it when you said that there is so many great macro factors set up. There's also an incredible setup within the crypto space from a regulatory side within the US. It feels like the first time in a long time that all the ships are aligning to head in the right direction at the same time. We completely agree. I think we also think we're mid-cycle right now, and we're about to go into the next phase of up only, which is really exciting to see. I want to touch on, you have an interesting perspective. We've talked about other public companies putting Bitcoin and ETH, more so Bitcoin. We haven't seen as many public companies put ETH. So it's really interesting that you decided to do both. And I'd love to talk about why you decided to do both. But I also want to get your perspective on, do you think other public companies in Canada or globally are going to follow suit? And any idea on like what kind of demand that could look like? Like, could you quantify that in any way? Because when we look at the demand that could potentially create, it could be very large, much larger than the supply that we have.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're starting to see, the impacts of what happens when these, moments bubble up with respect to demand. You look at the ETFs in January, that really opened up a floodgate for, retail or institutional investors that historically had overlooked the industry, or, didn't want to, let's say, sign up for an account like BitBuy or CoinSquare and buy the physical asset, but now they can get exposure through an ETF, and that really opens up the doors to more demand, which, as you saw in Q1, pushed the price to about 73,000 US. And so, you think about an asset class that is still very early in its life cycle, and the implications on the amount of Bitcoin that lives on exchanges and the amount of Bitcoin is, that is, theoretically up for sale. And when these, spikes in demand come, it puts real pressure to the upside on pricing, because there's just not that much Bitcoin to be acquired. Right. And so products like the ETFs can have a massive impact on price, certainly long term. The shift for corporates and treasury management and adding Bitcoin as part of that treasury management could, of course, similarly have a very meaningful impact on price for Bitcoin. And I think that's, what you're going to see play out. You're going to start to see a lot more institutions get exposure to Bitcoin. You've seen a lot of this ETF flow originate through the first half of this year. I think inflows are north of 16 billion so far year to date. And, there's a lot of discussion around, large institutions, sovereign pension funds, as an example, still not buying. And if you think about sovereign or pension funds putting 1% allocations, that can really have an impact. You think about a few large corporates, there's been a lot of talk about Dell being one of them potentially. Michael Dell, the founder of Dell, has been slowly becoming a little bit more public with his admiration for crypto. You think about, the kind of impact that alone could have, let alone a few of them. You're really starting to see, what happens when Bitcoin and digital assets start to get mass appeal. And, we certainly expect some of that to play out this cycle. We've seen a lot of it play out over the course of, the last few years, and, the 6+ years that I've been involved within the industry. And, both BitBuy and CoinSquare have obviously their retail platforms, and they also have their institutional offerings as well that help educate corporates, high net worths about the asset class, about how to buy it, how to store the assets. And so there's still this educational process that plays out. But certainly when you think about the sentiment shift and the credibility that this industry has received, or, benefited from over the last 6+ months through the ETFs and some of these other developments, that really goes a long way in terms of bringing more people to the party. And, ultimately through that process, increased demand, which we've seen in the past, certainly can lead to, price discovery.
Let's talk a bit about ETH. So you mentioned you are buying ETH in your treasury right now as well. And before we hit record, you told me that you plan to stake your ETH. Do you think that other public companies are going to start to put ETH on their balance sheet? That we have not seen as much yet. And do you think that they might stake it? How do you think they're going to go about it? And why did you decide to do it?
Yeah, look, I think, similar to my points with respect to the Bitcoin ETFs, I think the launch and, the subsequent inflows that we would anticipate with the Ethereum ETFs will certainly give it more credibility and make it larger part of the discussion when corporates are talking about treasury management and the inclusion of digital assets within that. Certainly, on the surface, you think about the yield component to ETH, being able to stake it and earn 4+% on that, through in Ethereum. certainly gives it, a bit of a differentiator from Bitcoin on the surface. We obviously, have a fairly positive view on decentralization and decentralized products and the role they'll continue to play in the industry more broadly and the evolution of the industry as well. And we think there'll be a inflection point. Obviously the first step here is for Ethereum ETFs to come to market. We think the evolution naturally will lead to yield bearing products where some of the Ethereum within these ETFs or all of it can be staked and that yield can be passed through to the unit holders. And we think that's really where, Main Street will start to really find a lot of value in Ethereum. The idea that you can get exposure to the digital asset industry and generate, yield passively throughout that process, it's really attractive. And so we would expect that to, over time, resonate with a broader audience, certainly a more institutional audience. And I think that will reflect on corporate treasuries as well. Certainly for us, being as close to it as we are, we really look at Bitcoin and Ethereum as, the two leaders by a meaningful, distance. And, we are certainly as comfortable holding Ethereum as part of our treasury program as we are Bitcoin. And, over time, we would expect, certainly others to take similar positions. We think the fact that you can stake it and earn yield certainly will resonate long term as well. And, we are, happy to endorse that, at an early stage.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up staking being a part of the ETH ETF. Currently, it's not a part of the ETH ETF, at least in the US, when it launches next week on July 23rd. But SEC Commissioner Pierce came out yesterday and said that she thinks that staking could be part of it in the future. So it is very likely to come. Where do you think we're at when we step back and we look at TradFi adoption of tokenization within the traditional financial markets? Where do you think we're at right now? And where do you see 6 months, a few years down the road?
Within that context, I think we're still very much, early stages. I think the Bitcoin ETF was really the catalyst and the starting point to really, force this asset class, onto the main street and, really, as part of the institutional discussion with respect to asset allocation. Now through an ETF product, it's way more accessible than it ever has been for institutions. You think about the fact that markets like Canada had ETFs before, but you think about the liquidity and the credibility of an ETF, say by BlackRock alone, and then the fact that there's about 10 of them in the US, that makes it just far more accessible than it was, even while there were ETFs in smaller markets like Canada. We think the fact that, these products have seen really good traction. So these are some of the best performing ETF launches of all time. That's going to resonate internally with the likes of BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, and others. And they're going to start, selling these with a bit more confidence, a bit more outbound, sales, I guess in general. And so you think about what that can do longer term. We think the ETH ETFs are a good example of, what happens when these products are successfully rolled out. And guys like BlackRock really are encouraged by the results. So, Ethereum ETF coming as quickly as it is, I think is a really strong indication of the relative interest that Wall Street and institutions have for the asset class. What we'll likely see after that, and we both sort of touched on it, is the idea of some ETH ETF with a yield component. Longer term, I do believe you'll start to see products like Solana ETFs, and then you'll start to see structured products, and whether it's, a basket of the top 10, top 20, whether it's a basket of layer ones or a basket of layer twos, my feeling is you're going to start to see, a strong increase in the number of structured products that exist that will try and give people exposure to, the various elements of the industry. I've been in this industry long enough to know Bitcoin and Ethereum are, the two leaders, but certainly there's a large world and a ever growing world outside of them that, offer, relative exposure to either interesting technology or, as a beta to some of the Bitcoin and Ethereum exposure that people will hold. And I think, Bitcoin and Ethereum are really the starting point. And as people learn more and gain comfort holding Bitcoin and Ethereum, they continue to educate themselves on, layer one alternatives. What are layer twos? What is decentralized finance? And, what are some of the protocols that are getting it right within that, sort of vertical. Real world assets is something that is really, found its footing this year with products like Ondo Finance, really finding those real world examples that have, that can really grow TVL in a meaningful way today. Um, and so, I think through these processes, there is a lot to learn and like about what's happening when you sort of look beyond Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I think ultimately that will resonate, with Wall Street, and it'll probably find itself through structured products and, various baskets or indices of exposure to, the various subcategories within the industry.
What we're doing right now, and you point this out so well, is we're really just enabling more access to institutions, which it's always nice to hear. I think a lot of people think that the institutions are here because the Bitcoin ETF went out 6 months ago and everyone's like, oh, the inflows have been massive. It must be institutions buying it. But when we look into the underlying numbers, it's actually not a lot of institutions. It's a lot of retail. So the institutions actually might not be here yet, but we are giving them access and they are coming. And that's just, I mean, I can't think of a more bullish sentiment than that. You also, though, are very excited about building on chain, which I think is very interesting about WonderFi and your various brands. Is you just launched WonderFi Labs, which is focused on building your first two products are going to be an L2, an EVM L2, and a non-custodial wallet. Where do you think adoption is coming from? Or I should ask more so, what will be your focus with this L2? Are you going after RWA? I hate the term RWA, but are you going after real world assets and more the TradFi space? What's going to be your focus, and where do you think the opportunity is there?
Yeah, I mean, look, WonderFi and the brands that we operate, have a history of, being first in market in this industry and building really good products and brands that resonate with quite, significant audience, certainly in the Canadian market thus far. You think about BitBuy, CoinSquare, SmartPay, Tetra Trust, which, was originally built inside CoinSquare. We have a long track record of innovation and building products and services within the industry. We can't help but notice the continued trend on chain. And we think that there's a really strong opportunity to build, products and services on chain that resonate with a global audience. And, we think that user experience is really important, and making it, frictionless and really easy for people to bridge on chain and get their assets on chain. And so we're really focused on bringing, certainly the Canadian audience we have, but a global audience, giving them, seamless access to on chain, products and services. We think that the world is going to continue to move on chain. The trend is clearly in our favor with respect to on chain activity. I think historically, user experience has been clunky. The friction around getting assets on chain and keeping people on chain and making it, super intuitive for people to, sort of, access all of the different elements of that exist on chain.
Do this. It's so hard to do right now. You see bridging. Like you tell somebody to go bridge an asset, they're like, bridge what? Like what? It's on different blockchains. What? Like, and everyone listening to this gets that. But we always have to remember that 95% of the world does not get that. I mean, what's the stat that there's about 500 million people roughly globally that own crypto, but about 90% of those people just have it on centralized exchanges. Like it's not even really on chain yet.
No, exactly. And so, we think, that is going to evolve. And part of that evolution process is going to be user friendly products and making it as seamless as possible, to the point where, perhaps in many instances, the end user is unaware that they're even utilizing on-chain protocols or products, right? And I think that's sort of the inflection point that we're inching toward as an industry. We're really excited to play a role in that and bring, more people on chain. And, whether it's retail or institutional, we think we have, the network and the, the really the talent from a product design engineering perspective to really, help lead these efforts. We think that there is so much to like about, decentralized finance and on-chain capabilities. And as that technology just continues to improve, really it comes down to, like I've said, like the user experience and making sure that it's as easy as possible for the masses to come on chain. You can't help but think about what you mentioned, 90% or whatever it might be of people that hold crypto, it's just sitting on centralized exchanges. BitBuy and CoinSquare are fully regulated in Canada and have had a really strong track record of keeping client assets protected. But I think there was an example in India with WazirX today about $200 million plus, security breach. And, there's countless reminders, whether it's FTX, Voyager, Celsius from the past, Quadriga in Canada, many years prior to that, the risk clients actually put on themselves when they keep assets on centralized exchanges that aren't properly regulated. And so there's an element of, consumer protection. There's an element of, all of the increased capabilities that exist on chain. We talked about RWA as much as we don't like that moniker.
Do you like that term?
No, I don't. No, I don't. But
Okay. What do you when you're talking to TradFi, what do you say?
I sort of heard as like tokenizing their products and services, right? If you have a money market fund and you want to tokenize that offering, sure, we could call it RWA, but you're really just taking your existing product and tokenizing it and giving it an opportunity to be marketed to a global audience that exists on chain. And, whether or not the moniker or the, however you want to refer to them, I can't help but think about the simplicity of, an Ondo Finance where it's just treasury bills. And that's, probably been the best example of an RWA thus far. I remember early on, people would have crazy ideas of tokenizing 10% of a condo building or a sports car. And that sounds great, but, in practice, that's probably not something that has demand or, liquidity or volatility to support a 24/7 market. You think about tokenizing things that people are actually looking to access on chain and give them an opportunity to stay on chain rather than, take their USDC into US dollars and then to invest in these products. And you're going to create a really exciting on-chain community. And we think that, there'll be more examples like that. And we're excited to, help, bring these products, to the mass.
Right on, man. I'm excited too, Dean, and shout out to you and the whole team at WonderFi, BitBuy, CoinSquare, all your products. Super awesome to see a Canadian company leading the way, not just in Canada, but also globally. Thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thank you. I had a great time. Happy to come back anytime.
We'll definitely get you back, my man. Have a good one. Thanks for listening in, everybody. Have a wicked, awesome day. Thank you for listening to Milk Road Radio, the easiest path to get smarter about crypto. If you like this episode, share it and hit subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on the next one. There's also a link in the description to our free 5-minute daily newsletter where we simplify crypto for you while making you laugh. And if you're willing to step up your crypto investing game, then we'll leave a link to Milk Road Pro as well, your #1 resource to help you invest successfully in crypto. One final note, this podcast is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Crypto is risky, so you should never invest more than you're willing to lose. Thank you, friends, and we'll see you in the next one.